It's now my pleasure to introduce Ben Caldwell, who is going to briefly introduce his own film, I and I. In 1977, I and I played to the Philadelphia Film Festival, as well as the Third World Film Festival here in Los Angeles, and the Flaherty Seminars. In 1978, the film I and I won an award at the San Francisco Poetic Film Festival. And now, Ben Caldwell.
Yeah, the only thing that I wanted to say about I and I was first that a lot of people think it's an African, a lot of people think it's a Rastafarian concept. It's only because that has been the most publicized view of it. It is a word that has gone back as far as Sanskrit, as far as the Egyptian use in mythology and stuff like that. It's a concept that basically deals with a lack of division of people. It's saying that we're both the same, I and I. And in the beginning I have a poem that speaks to that, and it's called, "In the beginning there was one concept, and that was the concept of I. Then rose Apollyon the devil, claiming it was you and I. And from that day on there's been trouble in the world, and the world has gone astray." And all that means is like wars, killings, hangings, lynchings, and other things like that. I guess that'll be all that I'll use as an introduction into the film, and let the film itself speak for itself.
All right. Welcome back. Hope you enjoyed I and I. In case you just joined us, here in the studio we're going to be talking with the director of the film, Ben Caldwell. Ben, can you tell us a little bit more about the expression I and I, where it came from and who uses it, and a little bit more about what it means in relationship to Western beliefs?
To Western beliefs?
Western beliefs. Well, first of all, what it is, and then contrast it.
Okay. The word itself is called I and I, and as I said, before the film started, it deals with the splitting that has happened, and I believe mainly through automation and the stuff that we call modern age man has split us from each other, and split us from being who we really are. And I first noticed this, even though I didn't know the concept. I first noticed it when I was in Vietnam, and in that you were not able to really rip off a person until you were able to make him a thing separate of yourself. And that's the first thing that they tell you to do, is to use a word like gook, and then therefore that person is no longer who you are. So that's how the whole concept evolved in its usage in my film, because I believe that that's the basic premise of how slavery started. It was only when Westerners went to Africa, and that they could say, "Oh, let's enslave those people. They're less than human, so therefore, they're separate from me." Because you couldn't enslave someone who you considered yourself, or considered, your blood brother, or your part of your family. So that's how I started dealing with that. But there's also a book called 2000 Seasons that deals with the basic concept too, and which is mentioned in the film. It's called Reciprocity, and it's dealing with the circular meaning of humanness, of how we're all the same. And so I guess that's basically how. But if in dealing with the historical aspects of it, it's words. Carl Jung did it. Used it in a lot of his theories about the I and thou theories. You can find it in Sanskrit in the sense of I and I. You can also find it, as I said, in Egyptian history, Egyptian, and a lot of the African basics. And here in America, Black Americans used it, even though they didn't call it I and I. They used the same concept in calling each other's blood or brother. So that's how the usage of I and I became, used in my film.
Mm-hmm. The Rastafarians in Jamaica use the term a lot too. You said their back to Africa philosophy. And the whole Rastafarian movement seems to have some interest here in the United States. Do you think it's going to grow? Do you think there is much significant interest in the Rastafarians and their beliefs?
Yeah, I don't think that it's quite prevalent, but I do think that a lot of people, especially black Americans, follow the Back to Africa concept, whether they know it or not. Because Back to Africa, all that the Rastafarians could basically mean, you know, you can go there physically, but you can also go there mentally. And all it is just understanding what your basis is. A lot of people who especially black Americans who have been brought here had all their basic roots severed, and all they're doing now, and what the Rastas were doing in the sense of that concept, is just putting the roots back together, and it's making a whole man, you know, a whole person. And so it's not even when the term was used by Marcus Garvey in the early 1900s, it wasn't a concept. When he was saying back to Africa, he meant not only physically for the people who could properly help their fellow brothers Africans in Africa, but he also meant in the sense of your head, you know, in the sense of hooking up economically, as Europe has done with, you know, Britain and America are hooked up. I mean, they fight together, they trade together, and stuff like that. It's the same concept, you know, and it's nothing to necessarily be afraid of. It's just like everybody else has. I mean, everybody has to hook up with each other, and I want to hook up with my fellow brothers in Africa.
Mm-hmm. And towards the end of the film, there was a segment where a mother was holding a child, and she was speaking to him in terms that sounded like had a very strong black nationalist sentiment to it. Could you put that in some kind of context for us?
Okay. First, in the way that it was stated in the film, it did bother me. The film was... anybody who knows anything about film, you know, and in that it was shot improvisationally, and that was the only footage that I had of that particular scene. And I felt that the scene was quite relevant to my film. As for it having a heavily nationalist tinge, it does. But what was meant by it wasn't as fascist as it sounded, you know. And in that, you know, African people, it's basically the same thing, you know, is African people have to, you know, it's, what did it basically say? And it was saying that, you know, that we are rulers, and if you consider yourself as a part of me, and I consider myself as a part of you, that's basically what it was speaking to. It wasn't talking about a division, and that's what the film, you know, the whole film was talking about, a togetherness. And so the only thing that messed it up was when she said black people, you know, and that made it as if there was a division. But there were people who believed that all people were black people, so.
That's an interesting idea, that all people were once black people. Yeah. There was a line in the film someplace about talking about snow people. Mm-hmm. Could you explain that?
Yeah, well, there are some African historians who believe that that in following that same concept, that we are all brothers, and that that as people migrated closer to this and stayed in the sun areas, that they adapted to those areas, and part of the adaptation to that area dealt with a loss of melanin, and that's how the whole Western people started to evolve.
Mm-hmm. Your film brings up a question to me about what exactly black film language is, and what it's developing to be, and what is it?
Okay. Yeah. Okay. Like, the thing that I'm getting off into now, in the sense of trying to understand film language, is that, okay, first we have to, like, film is a methodology of telling a story, because it tells a story. It is often underestimated and not underestimated, but everybody thinks they understand it, because when you see a picture You see a picture and not a word, you know. And whereas, like if you were reading a novel, it would be telling you the story in words, and so that's a symbol of a visual image. But the film actually shows you the image, and it is what it is. So there is a methodology and a structure that I feel, just as music has a structure, just as our writing has a structure, and novels and all the various methods that we use for speaking have structures, film also has a structure. The structure that we know of now is basically the structure that of the inventors of this particular medium that we have, known as film. It was born in a Western world, and it's very similar to Beethoven, and that's all we're hearing right now. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So now I'm trying to get off into African languages like Zulu, Yoruba, and languages like that, and checking out the syntax, and checking out the structure, and see if there's some kind of similarities that I could transfer into film visually.
That sounds really interesting. Have you discovered anything from that? Has there been any?
No, I not as of yet. I do believe that there is a basic way of structuring film that just as music has its own cadence, you know, just as Stevie Wonder is different than let's say the Beatles, you know, and if Stevie Wonder sings the Beatles songs, it's different, you know, and it's a little thing known as soul that is added, and or if it's, you know, the Beatles can sing their songs quite well within their own context. So all I'm saying is just that the culture definitely has an influence of the pace, the cadence, and the structure. And there are even some people who say that languages even control the perspective of the way that people see things. So therefore, I'm now doing a lot more investigation in it, and we'll see what happens.
What kind of plans do you have for the future?
Most of my plans are dealing with educational films. I have a African mythology film that I'm trying to put together that's called Cycles, and it's dealing with 7 Yoruba gods that are made into American characters. And so I'm now evolving and dealing with that, and that's some of the ways that I'm going to try to deal with the structural linguistic forms of film. You know.
Mm-hmm. How do you think, what kind of effect do you think that films like this that are dealing with black and African history, what kind of effect do you think those are going to have on black audiences in the United States? And could you contrast that to the effect or the intention of what have been called the blaxploitation films, Shaft, The Mack, films like that?
I guess I understand what you mean, and in that the films that the films that I'm planning on making, and the films that other friends that I have are planning on making, are going to be founded in a strong historical sense. I mean, it's not going to be in a slavery context. A lot of like Shaft was made in a slave context. It was done as if you. It wasn't done as if you were once strong people who controlled and dealt with things. It dealt as if you were all bound. You know. So I do think that what we're going to see is films that are going to be more natural, more realistic, and less self-conscious. Mm-hmm. And to some people, probably a little more frightening.
Mm-hmm. Could you talk a little bit about your use of the African goddess of the wind in the film I and I?
In what way? I mean, talk about. You mean how I?
Well,
chose?
Right. How'd you choose her?
Well, I thought that I initially got the concept from Wayne Shorter's. He has a Voyage of Iska album, and it was a quite beautiful poem, in that it said, you know, imagine the wind so vast in scope, so boundless as to suggest infinity. You know, taking all that exists, time, space, and all along. You know. And I said, you know, that sounds pretty slick. And also, when in a film context, kind of excited me because it was fluid, you know, and it was moving. And that's part of the thing that I tried to deal with in the film, in making it clip, you know, move pretty fast, and use a multiplicity of pictures, and which is called rotoscoping. And I felt that that would be about the way that wind would handle itself, you know. If it was going to see something, it would be seeing it at quick clips, you know, a little bit different. But anyway, as the project evolved, I tried to figure out who was Ayiska, what was she about, you know. And by the word Ayiska, double I thought that it was probably a word that was Egyptian. But then, after investigating it, I found out that he imagined the word. So I had to then read more and more about African mythology and African history and things like that, and I found out that the lady's name and I think Dahomey name Alife, and so that's who she was. And I like certain things that happened in there. She's the daughter of Oya. I mean, she's the daughter of Oya, and Oya is water, and that's the reason I started the film out with water. Mm-hmm. The tree and having her evolve out of that and coming down the tree to the earth was also very much of an African concept, in that they believe that their deities come from the sky through the trees to them.
Mm-hmm. Ben, you grew up in New Mexico. What kind of things that happened in your life in New Mexico and before you got into making films that have kind of guided you in this direction of making films that have a historical base to them? That's too broad.
Yeah.
Did you have a good time growing up in New Mexico?
Yeah. No, it was an interesting thing in that, I mean, like, I was raised around, in New Mexico, and, okay, we were raised around the image of Geronimo, you know. Also, I have a lot of, my family was basically a migrant-type family, so we had a lot of southern roots, and we also had a lot of the voodoo things that passed down through the South by way of Texas and stuff like that. And as I grew up, and now in retrospect, I look back on those things, and there were a lot of interesting things that were happening. And so I don't know what that has to do with giving me a historical point of perspective, but that's the thing that got me really involved in wanting to discover what specifically makes us tick as black people. You know.
Mm-hmm. Okay, well, fine. Thanks a lot. This has been real interesting. We're real glad you could come and join us tonight and show us the films. We hope you enjoyed tonight's program, and we hope to see you again next week. Director is Jay Abramowitz. The switcher is Monona Wali. Floor manager was Gay Abu Bey. Cameras were Elrico Richardson, Teresa Waxer, and John McNally. And on sound, Barbara McCullough. And all this 20th century situation